Okay, let me try. Can they try now? Just refreshed it. Same, should be the same link. Yes. Okay. So we're working on activity 13. Let's see. So this activity, since it uses Mongo.js, make sure to look at the documentation for Mongo.js on your npm. For creating, I think they call a function called save. So these are the find functions: find, update, save. So make sure you use the save function for the first post route. Alright, so I'm going to create my database, warm up, DB, create a collection called books, okay, and did a npmi install all the dependencies that are in package.json. Haven't made any code changes, so let's run this, make sure this is up and running. Okay, so if you go to our browser, localhost 3000, so this should show up. It doesn't do anything, but this should show up, and you behind the add new, you should be able to complete this route over here. So the first route takes in the save function. Let's look at our over here. We have our collections. The collection name is books, so it's going to be called db.books. Okay, oops. And the function is .save. Okay. Now, going back to over here, we can either pass in the object that you're trying to save to MongoDB, and or you can also have a callback function which is optional next to this one. Okay, the first one is you have to pass in what you're trying to save, and the next argument would be the callback function, which is optional, but I'm going to use the callback function. Why? If there's any error, we would be able to catch the error. In this case, if there is any error, you won't be able to catch that error. So db.mycollection.save, this means db dot the name of the collection is books dot save, and then the object that we are trying to save, which is over here book, right? We declared that on line number 39. And then the second argument is a callback function, which will have error and doc. Okay, I'll follow the documentation. If this is more than one documents, we will use the word docs. Otherwise, I'm going to use the word doc over here because the document is coming back once the save happens. Okay, if there's any error, we will just log that error. I'll just say console log error. Okay. Else, if it is successful, we will just send do a res.send and send our document back to the UI. Okay, simple, straightforward, the save function. So save, the first argument is going to be the object or the document that you're trying to save, which is book, which we declared on line number 39. Okay, which is coming back from our UI. If you look in the folder, there's a public folder. It has all the JavaScript and all. They are calling, oh, there it is. So they are calling an object with title and author, and looks like a date as well. Okay, so you call the save function, pass in the object, and this should go ahead and insert in your Mongo database. So let's go ahead and try this. Let me restart just in case. So save function is being called on your add new. So if you type in a book title and an author, if I add new, let's go back to our Mongo database and see if this works. Books, view documents, and there you should be able to get a document created in your Mongo database. Go back to the code. Okay. We'll give you a few more minutes before moving on to the next one. Please make sure that the first function is at least working. The rest of them are not going to work if this is not working. You should be able to save from the UI. You should be able to add a book and author, and they should be added to your database. Okay. The only change is on your server.js. The front end code is already done. The JavaScript already there, so you don't have to worry about that. But this should be working. And if this is working, move on to the next one, the slash read. Find all the books marked as read. So if you go to your database, you should see a field which is false or true. It's a Boolean field over here, the last one. Currently it's false. Let's go back here and see. So there's nothing in the UI to turn that to true. We can do it from the query. But initially you are going to use the find function, and you're going to pass in this field name where this field is true. Right now it's false, but that's the condition that you're going to put in your second route. Okay, so db dot collection name, which is books, so db dot books dot find, and then within find you're going to pass in the field name, which is read, and then you're going to pass in the Boolean value, which is going to be true, because we are trying to find all the books with this Boolean value as true. The next one would be exactly the same. The only difference would be the Boolean value is going to be false instead of true. So for example, the first one would be db.collection name, which is books dot find. Okay. The first argument for find is going to be the field that you're trying to find. This is your where clause. Okay. So you're going to say where read is true. Okay. The second argument is same as the first one. It's going to be a callback function, and it's going to give you error or a single document. It's actually going to give you more than one. This is going to be docs, because there might be multiple books that have this value as true. Okay, so the rest of this stuff is exactly the same. If there's any error, console log that error. If there is no error, then we will just send this list of documents that we get back to our UI. Okay, the unread one is going to be exactly the same. The only thing is a condition that is changing. Instead of read is true, is going to become where read or read is false. Okay, the exact same thing. The only thing is this condition is changing. This will give you all the books with this Boolean condition as false. So you can just have this whole thing here, and the only thing that changes here over here is false. Okay, we don't have any book with this value is true, but we do have a book with this value is false. So you can actually test this route if you go to your browser and say /unread, and you should get one. You should get one book back unread, and there's the book that comes back. Okay, if this was true, if you go to your read route, it should come back. But this is, we only have just one book right now. We have to complete the next one so that, so for example, oh, I don't have the update one ready. So once we have the update one ready, we should be able to toggle this Boolean condition. All right, before you move on to the update one, that's a little bit more tricky. Any questions on either the post or the find ones? Yes. So save comes from Mongo.js. Okay. Insert is a actual MongoDB function. So if you are in your MongoDB console, MongoDB shell, that's where the function is called insert. The save function, this thing, this is coming from the npm package that we are using. If you go to package.json, we are using Mongo.js. Okay, so this is the package that connects our Node.js code to our Mongo database. So that's why it's called, it's different. It does the same thing, but the insert function, if you are on your Mongo shell over here and you're saying, I want to insert something, that's when you will use db.books.insert function. What is it? So the ID is generated automatically. So you don't have to worry about the ID. MongoDB is going to give you an ID. I'm not sure where does upstream comes from. Okay. Yes. Right. Right. That's what it. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. That's what it means. Yes. Yeah. It's going to look for. It's basically adding a row to your Mongo database. Adding a document. Sorry, not row. Document to your Mongo database. Yeah. Well, it will, if the insert does not exist, remember, we have to look at our Mongo.js, this library, not the actual Mongo one. So I'm looking at the documentation for Mongo.js on npm. If they don't have an insert method, it's not going to work. So if you search for insert, let's see if they have. So they do have. So this one, insert would work. So either you can use insert or save. Both of them would do fine. Yeah, but they don't have insert one. Yeah, or insert many. So you only have one function available in the Mongo.js. Okay, do you understand the difference? One is MongoDB, meaning the MongoDB shell, right? The actual Mongo database. This is a package that they have built on top of it. So they are the ones who are kind of saying, hey, these are the functions that we have made available. Okay, yeah. So that's the difference. Okay, any other questions? Does everybody understand the find and the save method? Okay, so take a look at the update as well. So let's search for update. Oh, they do have update one. And let's look at this one. So this is the function that you will be using: query, update, and options and callback. Okay, so this would be, if you go back to your code, there's a hint over here. So we are trying to update a document in our database with the ID, with this ID. Okay, and where is this ID coming from? It's in the URL. All right, so how do we extract the ID out? It's going to be rec.params.id. Okay, and you are going to pass the ID exactly like this: mongo.js.object.id, and you're going to replace this with rec.params.id because the ID is coming in your parameters. Okay, let me do the first one and then you guys do the second one, because the only difference between the first and the second one is first one is making the red boolean to true, mark as red, yes, and the next one is making it to false. That's the only difference. So I'll complete the first one using the update function. So it's going to be db.books.update. Okay, I'm going to be using the callback function so that if there's any error, we can look into the error. Okay, so there are three arguments. Let's see. First argument, second argument, we'll skip this one, and then I'll have a callback function. So two objects and one callback function. Okay, so let's stub this out first. So first object, second object, and then a callback function, which is going to have error or doc. Okay, I'm not calling it docs because we are updating just one row, right? We are going to be using the ID to find the row, to find the document that needs to be updated, and there's only one document that's going to be updated. Why? Because we are going to be using ID, and ID is unique. Only one of them can be updated. No two documents will have the same ID. Okay. So let's go back over here and complete our first condition. Let me put this in new lines so that it's a little bit easier to see. All right, so it's kind of like the SQL where it said update table name set. We are trying to set one of the fields, and then where ID is equal to ID, right? ID that comes back. So it's going to be the same thing. The field ID in Mongo database, if you guys remember, is called underscore ID. If you go back to your Mongo database, you will see the automatically generated field is called underscore ID. Okay, so that's the field that we are trying to match. And then what would be the ID? This function over here on line number 80. Okay, if you want to pass an ID, this is how you do it. So you will have to say Mongo JS dot object ID and then the ID. And as I said, the ID is coming in the URL parameters. So we're going to extract that out saying rec.params.id. Okay, so this is the document that I'm trying to update. And what am I trying to update it with? I'm trying to update this with red is equal to true. Okay, so remember from our last week class, for update we use a $set. That's what comes with Mongo database. So set is the one which is going to set the fields in your for your document. So in this case, we are saying set the read field to true. Okay, let's go back to our database one more time. This is my database. I'm saying where this ID matches, go ahead and update this field to true. Okay, now if there's any error, we will go ahead and give that error out. So I'll just copy this thing. If there's any error, console log that error. Otherwise, go ahead and send back the document that have been updated. Oops. Okay, the callback function remains the same as the previous one. The only difference is this update function. Okay, so there are 3 arguments to the update. One more time, if we go back to the documentation, required, this is optional, and this is optional. And how do I know the second two are, the last two are optional? Because of the square brackets. Okay, this is like a standard practice. If you see square brackets around a argument, this means they are optional. All right, no square bracket, this means this is required, optional, optional. Okay, so in my example, I'm using the first, second, and the fourth argument. The fourth is the callback function, so there is my callback function. The first one is the condition that is going to go ahead and find the document. So I'm saying wherever the document has this ID, go ahead and update the document with this field over here. Okay, so if we go back to our UI this time, if I said mark red, this book should actually come over here. If I come to this, oh, it did something, but it didn't come up over here. Oh, there it is. Okay, I had to refresh. Okay, so if I go back to my documents right now, it's false. If I refresh this, this will turn into true. Let's go back here, view documents, and now it's true. Okay, now if you want to flip this back to false, that's where your last API is. Okay, last route. So you're going to do the exact same thing. The only difference is you are flipping this to now false. Okay, so if we can actually just copy this whole thing and then do this. The only change over here would be this would become false. Okay, so now if I go back here, this got restarted, refresh. So if I say this mark is red, so it comes back in this one. Okay, so this would switch it back to false. Let's go back to view, false. Okay, so the last two routes are exactly the same. The only difference is we are setting the condition a little bit differently. All right, any questions? Please do ask questions. This is, it's it's okay, but it's still a little bit tricky. Before I move on to mongoose, yes, Irina. What is it? Uh huh. You'll have to make that find request again. In your UI, looks like they might not have the code, but you'll go back over here, and then you will make the find call that again with the route. So looks like it doesn't call that. If you look at the JavaScript, they're only calling those functions in your click routes. Okay, so you'll have to reload that page. You'll have to call that function again, which goes after your click route. Yeah, yeah, that's probably the only thing. That's why it doesn't call, but that's what's missing. So it's nothing on the back end. It's on the front end. That once you click this, okay, once it is done, just make the API call again so it comes back. What is it? What would you do in the backend? Right, we were using, huh? You can do a redirect, or, I mean, we were using, oh my god, I forgot the template engine, handlebars. So that's why it reloads the whole page. This doesn't use handlebars. Yeah, it doesn't. So maybe there's so I don't see any error. Let's see. Mongoose red. It might be what are you returning? Maybe I messed up the return statement. Let's see. Same thing. Am I sending the dog back? Um, you're doing response.json. Okay. Let's try that. Maybe that's that might fix it. So response.json. Response.json. Okay. So this goes back here. Let's go back here. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Chris did something magical on his. He fixed it. So you might want to talk to Chris how he fixed it. With what? Yeah, redirect will work. Yeah, I don't have to. Okay. Anyway, any questions on the functionality? How do we use the three functions over here? Find, update, and save. You can take a look at the break and see. I'm not sure what he's doing. Okay. All right. So let's go and let's start on the chapter mongoose. Okay. You can do you have something? Good. Okay. All right. We'll cover mongoose, and then towards the end of the class, I think Sam is going to introduce the homework, and you guys will have to use mongoose in that homework, I think. Okay. So, as I said, what is mongoose? Remember SQLize? That's what mongoose is. SQLize is for MySQL. Mongoose is for Mongo database. That's the only difference. Okay. So now remember when we were studying SQLize, the first step we had to do is create a model and then add that model to our server.js, then add a schema, add some column names and all that stuff. We'll be doing the exact same thing in Mongoose also. All right, we'll create a schema. We'll be adding field names to that schema. We'll be creating a models folder. We'll be adding all those stuff. It has validations. It has everything that you can find in SQLize. Okay, so in this activity, I'll show you how to do it, and then in the next one, you guys will do it on your own. Okay, so let me. All right, so let's go back to our npm first, and then look for. Let me stop this. Look for our package called mongoose, and that's the one we will be using. Mongoose. Okay, so mongoose is the ORM for Mongo database. All right, so npm install mongoose. We'll be following that, and then import the mongoose npm package. Okay, and then we'll be following this strategy. Okay, so they're saying the first thing you will do is mongo.connect localhost. This is okay, and then the database name, whatever you guys want. After that, defining a model schema, and I'll follow all of these instructions over here, and we'll create a schema. Okay. The other way is let's go to their actual website, Mongoose, and then look at the documentation over here. Okay, we'll follow this documentation. All right, let's start from quick start, install Mongoose, and then go ahead and require this thing. Okay, so I'm going to create I'll call it let's call this schema for now, because I will be creating a schema. We are going to have our server.js, so let's just create server.js. We are going to have our models folder. Models are going to represent each of the collection. Okay, for now we'll start with just one collection. We'll call it models folder, and within that model we create a model. So I'll create a hero model, hero.js. Okay, same as SQLize. All right. So let's go back to our server.js and add the requirements that they are mentioning on their website. The first thing is we'll have to install that. So mongoose. So let's go ahead and do this one. So we'll say const mongoose. I'm going to change this to double quotes. Okay. All right. And then we are going to connect to this one. So we'll copy this line. Again, I'm just following the documentation as they have. Okay. So looks like the second thing they're saying, call the connect function, pass in the URL. We'll change this to a different database which does not exist. Okay, so we'll call it HeroDB. That's what I'm going to call it. Okay, so in my Mongo database, this database does not exist yet. Okay, let's go back to the second part, the third part. They're saying create a variable called db and then assign it mongoose.connection and then two functions db.on. If there's any error, you'll get this error over here. Once this is successfully connected, you'll have this. So let's copy this and modify it to our liking. So I'll change var to const. Okay, and then this is good. We'll change this to double quotes. Okay, so this is a event. All right, so it's listening for an event if there's any error. So let's go ahead and replace this with our callback function so that we can output an error. So we'll say function, if there's any error, okay, we will log that error and then say error. Okay, once the connection is good, this event will fire, looks like, and then within this function, whatever you want to do it. For now, we'll just say connected to console log, connected to MongoDB. Okay, let's go back over here. What's the next step? The next step is you're going to create a schema inside your models folder. All right, we'll come back to this one. Let's go ahead and make sure that this is working. We are able to establish a connection successfully. So let's go ahead and install our, oops. This is, oops. Okay. All right, so let's do a npm I mongoose, install the dependency. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and run this. Successful. Okay. Pass an option, this thing, so that this doesn't come up. Okay, that's helpful. So let's go ahead and add this as well. So I'm going to copy this, and over here I will add this option as well. Format it. Okay, let's go back here, and the error is gone. To be sure, I can clear this. Nodemon server, and looks like it's good. Okay. Again, search for Mongoose, and that's the documentation we are following on their website. Okay, if you are following along, you should be able to connect to your local host if your Mongo database is running and shouldn't be any errors. Okay, you have errors? Collection dot what? Collection dot insure index. That's all I have. I have a require. I'm importing mongoose and then connecting. Did you copy the exact ones from their website?
Yeah.
It's not exact. That's why you're getting that error. So do you have your database? Let me go back in. No, you don't need a model. Not yet. We do need it, but unless you started using it. I'm not using anything yet. Huh? Yeah, it's not completed yet. So it's not, that's what it's not exact then. I don't have a model. We'll come back to model. That's the next step. The first thing is we have made sure that our Mongo database connection is good. I'm able to connect to my local host to a new database. There's no errors. The connection is open. Okay. So the next step is creating a schema. All right. The next step, they say we need to create a schema. All right. And then we are going to create a model. All right. Remember the step. And when it comes to MongoDB, the first thing we need to create is they call it schema. And the next step is creating a model. Okay. So let's look at the documentation for schema. And so the first thing they say, define your schema. So we'll kind of follow this same strategy. We'll have different fields, but we'll follow the same thing. Okay. Looks like you need to do a require schema and then your schema details. All right. So let's go back over here. So I'm going to define my schema and my models. Already have my hero.js. Why can't I access this file? That is weird. Okay. Oh, this is the new update from Visual Studio. I don't like this. They kind of bundle everything together. I'm not able to access this. Okay. Yeah. All right. Let me. Doesn't look like the new update is working very well. Yeah, but I created a JS file, so I'm not sure why I created it. Yeah, so it actually created a folder. So probably it's my mistake. So let's go back and fix it. So I'm going to delete this. Okay, I'm going to create a file. Hero.js. Okay, there we go. All right. So in this file, we'll create our schema. So let's go back to the documentation. The first thing is we'll copy this mongoose, import this, and then call this function property. I'll change this to const. I think this will be const too. This will work. Okay. The second thing is we are going to create our schema new. So this is a constructor. Right? You guys remember constructor? So since we're using the new keyword, looks like this is a constructor called schema, and then you pass in whatever you want over here, the field names. So we'll follow the same thing. I think we can use const. I'm calling it hero schema. Okay. Constructor, so new schema, and then this thing. Okay. Constructor looks like takes one argument, which is going to be an object, and this object is going to have our field names. So let's go ahead and create fields like we did in our SQLize. So I'll have a field called name. This is going to be of type string. Okay, let's look at our documentation here and see what are the schema types that we can use. String, number, date, buffer, boolean, mixed, object ID, array, decimal, 128. So all of these are available. We'll use some of them. So we'll do the string. We'll create another one for age, and this would be of type number. Okay, and I will create a simple boolean one. Okay, I'll call it is Avenger, and this is going to be of type Boolean. Okay. All right, so I have we'll start with these fields and we'll add a few more as you go along. So simple, just using the type and three fields. So let's go back over here. So we are done with this. Once we are done with our schema, the third part is creating a model. So it looks like you would do a model, mongoose.model, and this thing. So we will follow the same thing. So we're going to call a function. Let's say const hero is equal to mongoose dot model. Okay, so model takes we'll use the two arguments. The first one is going to be the name of the model, so we'll say it hero, and then the schema, which we declared on line number 4, so it's going to be hero schema. Okay, since we have this in a different file, we'll export it just like our SQLize, so that we can use it in our server.js. Yeah. Okay, so we started with the first part. We started with this from the documentation. We completed this, ran this, made sure this is working. Should have stopped my database. It probably already created a collection. Okay, and the next part, it says the second one, we need to create a schema, and that's what we did. We followed the documentation, created a schema. The third part is creating a model from that schema. So we created a model called hero, and then we're passing the schema. Okay, so one thing to note over here, this is what your collection name is going to be in your Mongo database. You will see it makes it lowercase and it follows and makes it plural, so it's going to be heroes. Okay, by default, that's what it does. So let's go back and first complete our code. Now we will go ahead and call this, import this in our server.js. So we'll say const hero is equal to require, and let's go ahead and import that model, which is going to be in my / models folder, and then here. Okay. Let's restart. Let's go back here. Let's see if something happened. Refresh. Okay. So there's still no database, no collection. And why? Do you guys remember the reason it doesn't create a collection or a database until you put something in it? So we have everything created, but it's not going to do until you put something in your collection. Okay. So that's what we will do next. Let's go back to the documentation. So we did the schemas. We did models. Now we are going to go ahead and insert some data in our collection using this format. Okay. Before I go to that part, any questions so far? Are you good? Okay. So let's go ahead and insert some data. So I'm going to create an object. And why an object? Remember, MongoDB is all about documents and objects, so you can insert a object. So I'm going to hard code a object over here, and then we're going to insert that. So we'll say just const Ironman. We'll insert this. Okay, and then it says I have to do a new. So it looks like a constructor. So I'll do new hero because that's my model name. And then it is expecting an object with all the properties. So we'll say the first was name, and put a name, age. So let's go ahead and put an age, and then a Boolean value called is Avenger. We'll put it true. Okay, so this is the document that I'm going to go ahead and insert in my Mongo database. Okay. Once the connection is successful, this is where I will go ahead and create. Let me go ahead and stop this, otherwise it's going to keep. There we go. So I'm going to use the collection name hero, the one that I imported on line number 3. Okay, that's line number 2. Okay, we'll use the create function dot create. Okay, What am I trying to create? I'm trying to create this document on line number 8. So I'm going to pass that variable, okay? And then a callback function, which will tell me if there's any error. Otherwise, going to return me a single document if it is successfully created, okay? Let's do a check if error. Um, let's say return stop the execution console dot error error, okay. If this is, oops, I have an extra parenthesis somewhere. Let's this one, yeah, okay. Otherwise, let's go ahead and console log the doc. If it is successfully added, I should get that same document back over here and should console log that. Okay, so we're using the create function. All right, create function, 2 arguments. The first one is the document that you're trying to insert. A document is a JSON object. A JSON object is just an object. Okay, so I created an object over here using my newly declared model, passing in these properties, and then going ahead and inserting that document. So let's go ahead and run this. Right, looks like it is successful, and the reason it is successful is because it is able to, I'm able to see this log line number 26. So now if I go to my database, let's go ahead and refresh. There's my database created. If I go to my collections, there's my collections. If I open this collection, I should have a single document over here. All right, any questions? Yes. Okay. What question do you have, Josh? You did what? Oh, okay, okay. Okay, so before that, if you go back over here, if you look at the collection, you see it's lowercase and it added an S. Okay, looks like our typo, it didn't do a really good job. Should be ES actually. Or is it correct? Anyway, so it's going to do a lowercase, and then so this is coming from this name over here. Okay, quickly one more time. What did we do? The first thing we started, look at the documentation. We started with importing our mongoose, then we created our connection. Okay, once my connection was there, I have my variable over here. Once this was done, we had 2 events, error and once. This will be fired if there's any issue with your database connection. If you get to this point, this means we were able to successfully connect to our Mongo database. Okay, once this is done, the second step was to create a schema. We imported this directly from our documentation, nothing that we came up with. Okay, then we created our schema, a simple schema with 3 fields. All right, the third step was to create a model from that schema, and this line does that. All right, so this completes our 3-step. The fourth step was, once I have my database, once I have my schema and everything, we will go ahead and use the create function so that we can insert something in our Mongo database. Okay, again, this create function is coming from your Mongoose definition. Okay, they also have a save function which does something similar. The only thing with save is save works on your document, works on your object, works on your JSON object that you're trying to pass. Okay, remember create function is using this thing over here. Let me stop this so that doesn't insert. If you are going to be using the save function, it's a little bit different. Save function works on the document that you're trying to insert. So in this case, it's going to be Iron Man, because this is what I'm trying to insert, and then you're going to say dot save. Okay, create works on the object that you have on the whole model. So I find it a little bit easier because this thing, what I'm trying to insert right now, I have hard coded it, but if you guys know that it's not going to be hard coded, it's going to be coming from your front end. So you wouldn't know what you're trying to insert. This is very specific. It's saying, oh, exactly what you're trying to insert, dot save. Works the same way. It will have a callback function with error and document just like this instead of, so you will have function, error, what it inserted, okay, and exactly this thing. All right, but the only difference is save function, it runs on the document that you're trying to insert. Okay, I didn't find it very useful because the document that I'm trying to insert is going to change over time. So if I have a new one, right, I can just use this one and change this instead of this over here. But you have two functions. I would start with create, make sure it stick with that one. Okay, any questions before we move on? All right, so one last thing before you guys do the next activity. There are some validation methods also available just like Sequelize. So these are all your built-in validators. They have the whole documentation. Some of them work only on number. For example, if you look at this one over here, the min and max validation only works on your number type. Okay. Most of them are required, works with all of them. So for example, if you want to add some validation over here, you would say, let's say name is required. It works a little bit different. So when you put in the required field, this means that this field name is going to become required. Okay. The weird thing you will see over here is this thing, a message. Okay. Name is required. Okay. So how is this working? Just by this keyword, this field over here becomes mandatory, becomes required. If this field is not provided, you will see this message. This is how this works. Okay, so this field is required. If you don't pass in this field, you're going to get this error with this message. That's how this works. Okay, you can have same like a default property, default validation. You can say by default this should be false. So if you don't pass this in, it's going to insert a default boolean as false. Okay, with numbers you can pass in min and max. So this would be min and max like this. So let's say we can use this exact one. Let's say minimum age is allowed for to use a program is 18. Let's say okay. Why do I have these two examples separately? Again, Max will check if you input a number more than 100 is going to give you a generic error or something saying, oh, not allowed or something. Okay, not a custom message. If you change this to use an array, this is the condition it will check for minimum. Okay, if you give a number which is less than 18, it's going to give you an error and the message is going to be this message. I'll change this. Okay, if you don't put a message, it's going to just give you a general error. I think it says, oh, max exceeded or something. Okay, if you want to give a custom message, make it an array. The first index at the first element of the array is the condition that is going to check. The second would be the message. Okay, these are all built-in validators. Remember, in Sequelize, we can have some custom validators also. For example, if I have a, let's go ahead and add a field called phone. Okay, and let's give it a type of string. And we will add some custom validation. So how do you add a custom validation? The keyword is validate and an array. Okay, similar to this one, min over here. The first element in this validate array is going to be a function. Okay, it's always going to be a function. What do I mean? It's going to be a function, okay, which is going to have an argument. You can call this anything you want. It's going to have, this is going to give you whatever user types in over here for your phone number. Okay, so once you pass in a number or a phone number, whatever the value for this field is going to come into this function over here. Okay, now you can check and say what should happen. It should return a true or false. So you can say return input dot length. Let's say our length of our field phone should be exactly equal to 10. Okay, so if this condition is false, we will say incorrect phone number. It's kind of a little bit weird syntax. Let me go over this. So again, these are all your built-in validators that you can add, and they have few more. You can look at the documentation. If there is a validator that does not satisfy the condition you're looking for, you can add a custom one. Now, how do you add a custom one? You use the keyword called validate, and this is going to be an array to start with. Okay, now this array is going to have two elements. The first one is going to be a function. The second one is going to be the error message that you're going to say once this validation fails. Okay, just like the min over here. All right, just remember, custom validation, use the keyword validate, going to be an array. This array is going to have two elements. The first one is going to be a function. We'll go through it, what that function does. The second one is going to be the error message that you want to show once this validation fails. Okay, now what goes in this function? This function is going to take one argument, and this is going to give whatever value you are giving for this field. So for example, my phone number field, I'm going to pass in, it has to be a string, so it's going to be 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 0. So this should be valid. Why? Because the length of this is 10. Okay, so this function has to have a return, and what is it checking? It's going to return a boolean. Okay, this is a short form I did, but you can write it whole out. You can say if input.length is equal to, this is same as if input.length is less than 10, then you would say return false because the validation failed, else return true. Okay, so instead of doing all these 4 lines, we can condense that into just one line over here. So it says, oh, if the input length is equal to 10, okay, return true. And if this condition fails, it's going to return false. If it returns false, this means we will show this error message. If it returns true, then everything is good. Okay, so this condition would work fine. This condition would fail if you try to insert this. Go back over here. Okay, so again, schema, similar to SQLize, your schema names, your types, these are your validators. These are built-in validators. This, if you want a custom validator, you are going to use a keyword validate. Okay, then you will build your own validation, what you're trying to do. Okay, but they do have quite a few validators which should fulfill the requirements that you're trying to do. All right, any questions? Let me make sure I covered everything for now. All right, so let's do this. Let's take a break and we will start at 7:55. Okay, we'll still have a lot to cover. When you come back, you will start working on activity number 15. Okay, come back, start working on activity number 15, which is creating the same thing with a different schema and model. Yes. Yeah, you can do it. It's not better. Why? Because I can go to your inspect mode and change the code. I can bypass that validation pretty easily. Huh? What is it? Huh? Well, I mean, I can see your APIs, and then I can pass it. So it is good to have front end validation as well. I'm not saying don't have it, right? Because it will save you a trip to your backend. But always have backend validation. Just make sure that nobody is trying to do something else and trying to insert something. So that's yeah. It's good to have both validation. What was that?
Okay, so I'll explain you what I want to do here because it's not required, but what I wanted to do is, oh wait, okay, this is the homework. So this is the last article and these are all the rest, okay? So what I'm doing here is trying to select first the last article from my database and save it in a variable, and then select skipping that article, select everything else, and pass into my browser like data from what we found here and that one too. But basically what happened, because it's asynchronous, I don't have the temp function that I tried it, but it's not working somehow. Sometimes it happens like this. See, because everything is like asynchronous. So
Yeah.
this happened and this didn't happen, and so he didn't care that that didn't happen. So how do we do this? We didn't really study promises.
No, it is written the promises part, right? Dot then function.
Yeah, but it's not working here. I tried.
So
It's saying we can do
so
something
so
underline.
You find one to
I
limit
find
to
one
one.
and I'm saving it in this variable outside here.
Right.
So,
No, it's not me. You have to create a callback function and do all that stuff.
but can I do the two database calls in the same function?
Yeah. So then you have to move this thing inside over here after
I
your.
tried it from the end. I tried it too. I tried many things. I
That
don't know,
should work.
there's something wrong.
So
So,
you find one, sort it somehow, and get the
okay.
first one. So
Yes.
once you have the first one over here,
I'm
right?
limiting it to one. And
Yeah. Once you have this, then you have to make this call over here.
oh, after I sorted it?
I don't know. After this, you need a dot then function. I don't know what is exec.
Execution, basically, what they explained, because of course we didn't have this lessons yet, so
Oh, just
finalized
change it
it.
to this will work.
It is just saying just execute what's all of above
Oh,
in there.
I'm not sure. Change it to dot then. Change exec to then. Okay. And then copy the lines from 44 to 55. Okay. You have to cut it. Move
Okay.
it after line number 41.
41?
Yeah. Okay, format this.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, you're using this.
Yes.
Okay, so then move this on the top. It's not required. Move it after the door. Yeah.
I think
You
it's
can
gonna
instead
work.
of you can just remove this and start using found, but that's okay. You can do that.
Yeah.
Well, you see, found and data are both. Same.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, that should work.
See? Something's wrong.
Coming still loading.
I think so.
Is it running? I didn't see
It
this.
should be. It should be done.
Stop.
Where's it stop?
Unless it is in a different window.
Yeah, that's different.
Okay, go back here.
Yeah, that's partial.
Um,
Come on. See?
okay, yeah, that's right. Let's.
No, process is zero, not actually cause something.
What?
Unhandled parameter rejection.
Yeah, it's a different. Stop this. It looks like it's a different. Lens. Okay. Um, are you using the racing function? Racing function?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I think this is considered as async now because of that.
Yeah, but not the keyword async. Right?
No, I'm not using it everywhere.
Where's
Maybe it's in the model somewhere.
this?
Your model.
No, even if there's it, they're calling it somewhere. Show me how does your code start? Is there anything outside? Because this shouldn't even be executing. Right?
This is how I'm scrapping my stuff
Okay,
from the
yeah, just
homework.
minimize that. It should be okay. Yeah. Minimize your router.get, the second one also. Minimize this also. Okay, I will. Where is this being used? Where is your server.js? Mm,
This is my schema.
no, in your server.js.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
what's in your. Oh, it's in
Oh, this is I copied this, but I didn't use it with my
Oh,
numbers.
you're using index a little different.
But no, now we're async. I'm not using async. I don't
Where's
know yet how
your
to use them.
Where's your controller? Yeah, controller.
That's
Okay, that's fine. Go back to server.js. Show me server.js. Alright, there are you. Dot use dot slash controller index and okay, that's in
It's still going.
something
Oh, it's
is
rejected us again.
something is continuously making a call. It's So you're from your server.js, you have your routes and that use routes. Go back to your index again. This one. You have a model, so you just find router.get. Mm, So it's not over here because this is not being called yet. Something else is being called even before. Scroll down.
How can it be?
Oh yeah, scroll down. What is this? Just calling
This is Morgan.
this get stats.
Yeah, that's Morgan.
Right.
Uh-huh.
Show me the more.
Morgan?
So,
The logo.
oh, so
Is
something is
the
happening over.
yeah.
But where are you using this logger? You're using somewhere here.
Yeah. Somewhere wait, logo. Is it right? Here.
Okay. Go back to your browser. Let's refresh that. Yeah. Refresh.
No.
No, it's still loading.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to go back to your code. Um,
It was the catch. I don't have catch anywhere. Maybe you have to put the after then the catch.
well, connected to MongoDB localhost.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
And then this. This is nice. And this is nice too.
yeah, this is all good.
Yeah,
So this
because it's on the route, so it is
okay.
happening.
So model.data.find. So you're trying to solve this in the same limiting one. So in find one, you don't have to pass in anything.
No, I just want the latest one, whatever what is inserted as the latest. So that's what I wanted to find.
Right, but you don't need a um, fine. You don't need an ID or something for find one. That's fine.
No, it's saying that if I'm using the natural order of the logo
Mm-hmm.
inserting, it will just give me the from that starting. So that's how I have to limit to one. So if I'm limiting to one, it's just give me the latest. That's it.
No, I understand that. The only thing I'm
So I don't need to
is
give the ID or something.
so you are using find one. This one. Okay, so I'll give you options now. Oh, change this exec to then as well. I wonder if that's the option. Oh, there it is. That was it.
I don't like when it's like taking a couple seconds.
Oh,
Terminated. Rejection again.
let's Um, just comment this part out. Just this part out. Let's see. We'll try to eliminate and see 43 to 54. Yeah, comment this out.
Are you not gonna work now?
Okay, so that's not the problem.
It doesn't work. I wanna work with them.
Hmm?
It doesn't wanna work with them.
It what? No, it's still not working. Hold on, let me
What if
start
I
this.
change it again? I will start it.
Yeah, let me
The break is on.
announce. Yeah.
I'm back.
Okay. All right, so we are on activity number 15. Similar pattern that I showed you, you guys are going to create a schema. Okay, so look in unsolved. There's the user model. So these are the, this is a schema that you're going to create. Make sure it's up and running. The database is created. Let's see. So the database would be called UserDB. If you like the name, that's fine. If you want to change it, this is where you would change it. Otherwise, there's no change in your server.js. Okay, the only change would be in your schema file, user model. It's kind of stubbed out for you. All you have to do is add these 4 properties. See if you can figure out the email validation. If you just Google regex pattern, oh, it's already given over here. Okay. So you'll have to add these 4 fields, create that schema. Once you run it in your database, you should be able to have these 4 fields. Let's go back to our server, see if there's any. Okay, once you run this, your UI should show up, and this would have a username and a password, looks like. Yeah, it's going to have a username, password, and text as an email. Once you add those stuff, you should be able to see it in your Mongo database. Okay, the only changes are in your user model, and you're going to add these 4 fields with some validation. Date with defaulted to current date is called date.now. I think it was spelled out in the validation. What's it? Schemas. Defining your schema. Okay, there it is. So you can use this for your date. User created field. And then the first, all of these are string, string, string. Email validation. Do the email validation at last once you have everything created, and then the tip for that is mentioned over here. Okay. I think the more challenging from this is the email validation. Again, you can find this in the documentation as well, and the hint is also there. So first, start with completing the schema. Make sure it's inserted in your database, and then we will move on to the next part.
Image has never shown up in Bootcamp spot. Like, you know, your little icon thing or whatever.
Oh, really?
It's never shown up, which I guess they said it's supposed to be connected to your GitHub portfolio,
Oh,
which is
okay.
what it's under. But they just added me to the new one
Yeah.
that's starting up next one,
Okay.
and now my picture shows up.
Oh, really? The February 25th?
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and now it shows up in the current one.
Oh, really?
I got no idea.
That's fun. I wonder if I can see the
DCS is so jacked up.
if I can see the new one or not.
Oh yeah, when you log in Bootcamp spot,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's showing up in mine. Now I have to select.
Um,
It should be 220.
yeah, I don't have it yet.
You don't have it yet.
Yeah, I haven't. I didn't sign the.
Oh, what's
I got it this morning. I haven't gone through it. Yeah, it looks fine. I'll just have to.
I'm glad I
Set-
didn't have
do
to
it tomorrow.
redo any of it.
Yeah, I saw that. Well, if you are retained, then don't worry about it. There's a big email.
Yeah.
It's
I know.
says-
Tiny little spot.
I'm like reading through it. Oh, if you're retained, you're not. Okay, well, fine.
We really want you to go. Now the true test is if I go into payroll, if it's still gonna say that I'm you're terminated on the last day of class.
So here's maybe they have to duplicate it. But what has happened in the past is the killer keeps running, and he had to, let's suppose you want to take a break. And there were, my first cohort, there were peers who were still there, and they were nice enough to actually call and tell them. Well, the downside for me was they paid me the same 4-week one because they renegotiated, and then they, so until you tell them, they were like, no, we're in a good system, so you can make me get paid until you can use. I never see we got this thing.
You get it automatic bump too.
Oh, really? Oh, that's
Yeah.
yeah. You get 1,000. Do you get $1,000 bonus thing?
I think so.
It is.
Oh yeah, maybe.
Okay.
Maybe you don't get. Maybe it's offset. I gotta go back and look now.
Okay.
Because the monthly rate's higher, but you're right. Maybe they don't do that. 500 onboarding.
No, this will.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you will get that.
Okay.
Even if you don't do this thing. Or you don't have to do it, but they will still. Yeah, you know, you'll get it. I've got it and everything.
Okay. And I think we actually have like a week off in between this time, right?
Yeah, stops on Tuesday, and then there's a week off, and then 25th.
Yeah, that's right.
Usually that's how they do it.
Oh, okay. I've only seen the last couple times.
Yeah.
Day in be like one class
Yeah.
period in between.
Really?
Often they start right up like I think JJ did.
JJ is special. JJ has classes, have done classes like Monday to Thursday,
Yeah.
like every single day. So he's special.
He's
I don't know for the contractor ones like us, they will be. This was my fourth. Every time they give me a
Oh,
week,
that's it.
I think that's how they schedule it.
Right.
They know when this is ending, and that's how they do it. JJ is special. Like, he I don't know how
He's
does
a
it.
different dude.
Yeah. Well, he's full time also.
Right.
So he can't really complain. So
He never fails to mention anytime he was
yeah.
again. I mean, kind of like your boss, but not your boss.
Yeah. He comes in like every single of my classes.
Yeah.
I wonder if he came. Did he come this?
He did.
He did?
Yeah,
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. I can't remember if he like formally came in, but he came in and was like, "Hey, you have any questions?"
Yeah, that's how he comes in. Yeah.
Well, we would try to measure the same method. That should be if you save one in your database, and you try to create a new one that has the exact same email, then that's where the validation should be. Now, it doesn't look like you provided a message on, right? So there's a message. So what did the documentation say about it? Oh wait, no, never mind. Yeah. And that looks like if you look at that.
All right, let me go over the user model solution quickly. It should be very similar to the one that I solved when I for the hero database. So for this one, the first field was username. It has to be a type string. You can use the trim. If you use the trim, then if you add spaces at the start or at the end, it's going to trim those. It's a required field. If you don't give it, you're going to get this error message. Okay? This is how you would create the user field. The second was the password. String, trim, required, yes. Um, Now, validate over here, remember, if you use the keyword validate, this means it's custom validation. So they're creating a custom validation requires two elements. The first one is the function, the second is the error message. But instead of validate, if you guys looked at the documentation, there is a min max that you can use for strings also. So you can check either use min length, max length. All right. So string data type has this. So you can use the oops min length as well. So you have two options. Either you can have something similar like a custom validator, or you could use the min length over here. Both of them will work. Okay, with min length you don't have to have a custom validator. You would say min length and then an array, whatever minimum length you want, and then comma, and then the second element would be the error message. So you have two options. Okay, the last one, email type string. This is how match works. All right, same thing, an array. The first is this regex pattern over here. Okay, and the second is if it doesn't match, then it's going to give you this error message. Okay, you can read more about regex, but basically it is saying that there should be a dot is allowed, a plus is allowed, then followed by an at sign, and then some more words, for example, Gmail, and then should have been a dot followed by some more words. So it's kind of regex is basically a pattern matching formation. Okay, we can read more about that, but this was already given to you. The only point over here was to show you guys you can use the match as well. So match, you can, it's just not limited to email, any type of string. Okay, I'll come back to this unique in a minute, but that's how you would do the email. User created, type is date, and I showed you the default one. You can use default, just says whatever the current date is if you don't pass in that field. Okay, it's not a required one, so you can skip it, and this would by default would put in the current date. All right. What I understand, this is not correct. If you look at the documentation, I think there's a mistake in the solution. It says email must be unique, but if you go back to your documentation, that's not how unique works. If you go to your validation and you check the unique, they have like spelled out like separately that unique option is not a validator. So the way people would expect is if I put unique over here, I shouldn't be able to save another username with the same value. That's not how unique works apparently. Okay, if you look at the a little bit more documentation, uh, what unique does is it's kind of like a behind the scenes. Okay, it's creating an index, and that's index is unique. So if it generates, remember index is a hash over here. Remember when we were encrypting the password, you could see a big hash. So basically that's what index does. Okay, so if it generates a unique hash code for your whatever field it is, and the next time by any chance somehow the same index is generated, that's where the error will happen. Okay, that's the unique part is. Okay, it's a little bit more complicated, but I think the way in the solution is this is not going to work. So you can try this. If you put unique true, you should be able to enter an email address with the same name in the JSON parse on your front end.
Yes.
What's the error?
It's saying that duplicate the error collection.
Okay, is there any other validation on the front end for the email, or this is the only one?
Just, well, there's a pattern, but it says to the user information that the email is
Okay,
so
so
it's not gonna instantly outfire.
right, but it might be Right, but it will be a little bit different. There's if you read the that's the exact same question. That sometime it works, sometime it doesn't work. But that's how the unique is for. You can see it says you can still save the duplicates, but sometime it works, sometime it doesn't. The only reason it might be working because the index might by any chance be the same index. That's why it's working. But let's not depend on the unique. We'll have to find a different way to do it. But that's how the documentation says. I haven't tested this out, but that's what it says. It's not the way that we are trying to use unique. Okay, you'll have to run a find query, make sure it doesn't exist. That's probably a better way versus depending on the unique one. Okay, but that's a little bit more advanced. I just wanted to point out, looks like there's an issue in the solution. So just be careful if you're using unique. It's not what it is supposed to do. Huh? Okay, so you have to do, you can add a custom validation over here and then run a find query and check if that exists. Or I'll show you how to add a custom validation in a custom method right now. Okay, you can use that one as well. Okay, all right, any questions on this one? Any part of the schema? All right, so if you go back to the documentation where we left off, we created a schemas, we created a model. We'll look at the last part, which is instance methods. Okay, we have seen this in Sequelize also, and you guys might not remember actually. I use this in the passport code that if you guys followed the passport and authentication. Sequelize also has instant method, and if you go back and look at the code we use, the decrypt and the encrypt one, those were instant methods on your model in Sequelize. Okay, the same thing is present in your Mongoose also. So how does this work? Let me go back to my original example, and then I'll add a function over there. And I think you can use the same one for your validation as well. So going back to my hero schema, I'm going to add a method on my model. Okay, we'll come back over here. And then let's go back to the documentation here. So it's saying you can add a method, schema name, dot methods, and whatever the method name is. Okay, so my schema is called hero schema. So we'll go ahead and add that method over here. So we'll say hero schema dot methods. Okay, and then a method name. So I'm going to create a method, let's say set universe. Okay, we'll see what that function does. And I create a function, I don't need any arguments, and that will be my method. Okay, now in this method, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a Boolean condition. I'm going to use our let's go ahead and create a property, a new field. I'm going to call it universe. Okay, and this would be simple string property. Okay, and this is not being set from my data. So if I go back to my server.js, I'm not going to set this from here. Okay, let me remove this. We don't need this anywhere. Okay, so what am I going to do is in my method over here, I'm going to say if I'm going to set the value in my method. I'm going to say this dot universe. Okay, so if you're trying to access a property or a field that is inside your schema, you would use a keyword this dot universe, and I'm going to say if the character is Avenger, then they belong to the Marvel universe. That's what I'm trying to say. So this dot universe will use the ternary operator. So this check the condition is Avenger. If this is true, I want universe to be Marvel. If it is false, I want the universe to be DC. Let's keep this one. Okay, and then once this is complete, I'm going to return this dot universe. Okay, so this is called creating instant methods on your schema or on your schema, right? So we have seen this example. If you go back to the authentication, I did create a couple of methods for decrypt and encrypt, and we were calling them outside using Sequelize. Okay, for the same result, this is how you would do it in your using Mongoose. You would, in your schema, you would create a custom method. Over here, I have a custom method called setUniverse. All this does is it's adding some a string to this property that I created. Okay, now how do I use this method? I will go back to my server.js, and once I have my data created, I'm going to say Ironman dot oops dot set universe. Okay, now where does this method exist? Yes, so this is what is the type for this variable over here? It's hero, which is a model. Okay, and this model contains a schema, this one, and this schema has all these fields and a method, okay, which is called set universe. So as long as this name matches, I should be able to access this function over here. And what does it do? This function adds a value, a string to this property over here. So I don't need to pass this property in my data. I'm going to fill this property using the method over here. Okay. Now, can you use this for validation? If you think about it, you can say when your data comes in, you would say, oh, validate email or check for uniqueness. And then in this method, you can make a call to see if your email already exists in the database or not. Let me go ahead and complete this. So if I run this code now, let's see if I have documents. If I do, this is my old document, so I'm going to delete this. And then you will be able to see, if this runs correctly, we should be able to see a new field called universe. And depending on this property over here, it's going to put some string over there. So if I run this, okay, successful. These were already there. This one, again, I'm not passing this in my data over here. Okay, this property does not exist. This is coming from this function, and that's why you have this last property. So if I go back to my database, view documents, and this is my property. Okay, so this functionality is called using instant methods. Okay, and you can add some methods on your Mongoose as well. Again, this is the same functionality in Sequelize. If you use it in Sequelize, it's the same thing. If you didn't, it might seem new. But if you go back to the authentication code that we use for Passport, I'm using this functionality over there as well. Okay, what does it do? It provides you some extra functionality that you can call if your data does not have all the fields. Okay, let's suppose you are not going to get this universe field from your UI, from your user. This is something that you want to calculate based on whatever this input is. This is how you would do it. Okay, what do you have to do in your schema? Before the schema, you would use your schema name. This is mandatory, so it's going to be dot methods, dot, and then whatever function name you want to give. Okay, once you have this, your logic is done. You would call this from your server.js based on your document. You will say document dot and then whatever the function that is. Okay. All right. So based on your user schema, let's go ahead and do the same thing. Look at your user schema, and this is activity number 17. It's following the same one, but this should have your user schema done from your. It should have the solution from the previous one. What you have to do is you have to add a custom method. So let's go back over here. So go to user model. That's the only thing. So we'll go to our user model over here and let's look at the comments. The schema from the previous solution is already there. So you shouldn't have to make any changes over here. The only thing would be towards the end. You are going to add two methods, set full name and last updated date. Okay. So use the same thing. It's going to be called user schema dot methods dot set full name. Create a function and complete the logic for this one. The second method is going to be last updated date. So this is going to be user schema dot methods dot last updated date. And then you should, let's go back to our check our server.js if this is already being called. Okay, so you will have to call these methods on line number 34 and 35. All right, so start with this first, create two functions, user schema dot methods dot set full name and last updated date, complete the body, whatever the requirement is, and then in your server.js, you are going to call those two methods on line number 34 and then 35. And that you should be able to create two more fields, set full name, and that will be, let's go back and see. So it is referring to a property called full name. Okay. Sets the current user's full name property to their last name, appended to their first name, and then this would be last updated property to date.now. So those both properties are on lines 65 and 67. Remember the this keyword, you would use this dot last updated or this dot full name. So you can still use the unique one. You just have to be careful when using it. Just make sure you read the documentation of what they're saying. It might be like a hit and miss, but if you have to be 100% confident that the unique works, they have some code over here that will guarantee that the values would be unique. So the thing that they're saying is MongoDB doesn't have a unique thing, right? You cannot have a unique on a field, and that's how the NoSQL databases are. There's no primary. There's a key, but the key is not based on your field anything. Okay, so that's what they're saying. If you try to insert, even though you have unique true in the schema for this field name, but if you try to insert, there won't be any error. There might be error if you wait for the index to build. There's no guarantee that will happen, but if you do want guarantee, they're saying this is how you would have to do it. So if it is working for you, it's probably because it's kind of hit and miss. It worked for you because the index might have been completed. Um, but if this was not complete, it's not going to give you an error. Or just wait for it. Yeah, just give it some time and then run it. But this is like 100% sure way. So make sure you understand before you're using unique in the previous activity. Anyway, for now, two methods: set full name, last updated date. So we are following kind of this part in the documentation. So there is schema name dot methods dot the function name, and then you're going to call that function from the server.js. All right, let's take a look at the changes that were part of this. So the changes were in the user model. Okay, so you have to add two functions. So the schema remains the same, so we can skip this from the previous solution. You had to add two functions, set full name and last updated date. Okay, so the syntax was your schema name dot methods and a function name, and that's what this one is, and the same for the last update one. Okay, now within the function, looks like set full name should add a first name, last name, and save it to this field full name. Okay, so this dot full name is equal to add those two up with a space, and that's what we are saving it to our full name field. Okay, for the last updated date, looks like you had to refer to this field over here, okay, and set this to the current time. So all this method does is sets it to the current time and then returns whatever the new updated date is, whatever this field is. Okay, so these two fields were already there. You're adding functions that are changing the contents of these two fields. Okay, again, the syntax is the name of the schema dot methods and then whatever function name or method name you want to give. Okay, the second part to this is, since we already have the definition of these functions, we are going to call these functions, and we are going to call these functions from our server.js. Okay, you are simply calling these functions. Remember from my previous example, I was using the constructor for my model and then passing in whatever the data is. This data is coming from the front end, so it's in the request body. So you don't have to do any of those stuff. You just have to create a variable and then call these two functions, and they're going to add data to these two fields. So once you run this, you should have in your Mongo database from your front end, you should have those two fields inserted in your document as well. Okay, so the solution for this was changes to these two. First of all, defining those two functions, and the last thing was calling those two functions. Okay, any questions on methods? How do you add methods to your using Mongoose? Again, these are all conditions and properties that are given to you by Mongoose. It's not part of MongoDB or MongoJS. This is available because we are using Mongoose. All right, any questions? What is it? Server? So you're calling these, that's all. And that should insert the data when this is already done for you, so you don't have to do it. It will create a user, but this user is going to have this information if it is called correctly. Okay, so if you compare to SQLize, we started with how do we connect to our SQL database, then we looked at models, schemas, then we looked at some custom methods. There's one last thing that remains. Any guesses from SQLize? What is it? No, that's correct. What is it? Delete? No, not delete. Something else. So we did the schema, we did the, from the concept wise, we did, remember SQLize, we created our models, we had our schemas, then we had our create all our CRUD operations. Then we looked at some of the, we didn't look at the instant method, but from our authorization, we used it. SQLize, there's last thing remaining in SQLize. Joins. All right. So SQLize has joins, but okay, Mongo database doesn't have joins. Okay. Remember what was the keyword that we used in SQLize when we were joining tables? Include. If you don't remember. Okay. So same thing when it comes to Mongo database. Okay, there's no joins, but what happens is your collections can get super complicated. For example, the collection that we will take a look at is we'll kind of look at the example that we did on for SQL a little bit different though. We have a library, and a library can have many books. Okay, so in our schema for Mongo database, we're going to have collections. Let's suppose we're going to have a collection called library, and it's going to have information such as name, address, where the library is, few more things. Okay, and then we're going to have books. Okay, this has to be an array, right? And then book is going to have its own individual properties, right? A book name, ISBN number, author, and those kind of stuff. So this is going to be an array of objects, right? Does that make sense? So I have a collection called library, and then within library I have information about the library, the name, address, and few more things. Okay, but within the library I have books, and books has to be an array because there are more than one books. Okay. So now, with what kind of array is that going to be? It's going to be an array of objects. Why? Because each book is going to have its own properties. It's going to have a name, author, ISBN number, a few more things. Okay? So, um, these kind of schemas can get a little bit more complicated. Right now, there's only two levels. If I wanted to get books, you would do library.books and then by index number. But these kind of things can get super complicated. So what we do is we kind of separate these individual things into different collections. So we'll create a collection books and a collection library, and then we are going to connect these two together in MongoDB. So these two collections are related. So whenever you get a library, it's going to give you all the books that you have. So in this array, we are just going to store book IDs. Okay, so still going to have an array of books, but it's not going to have an array of the whole book information. It's going to just have an ID, and then we are going to go to the book collection, which will have name, author, number, and everything, all these properties with an ID. And Mongoose is going to make the connection and get us all the books that belong to the library. Okay, do you guys see the relationship? So there's a library collection, there's a books collection. Books has all the information about book. There's no relationship from the books to the library. Like book is individual, it doesn't need any library, but a library contains books. Okay, so the library is going to have the information or the ID for the books, and then when we call an API that gives us all the JSON for a library, is going to give an array of books, and then it's going to relate to the books collection and get all the information for that books as well. Okay, if this was SQL, this would be a relationship between library and books. Okay, remember one to many, many to one, all those. So we'll have a relationship between these two. But since there are no joins, no relationships in Mongo database, we don't have to worry about those things. All we need to keep track is that eventually all the books collection, they're going to come and embed themselves into that array. Okay, so I'm going to walk you guys through the code. So we'll start off with our two collections. We'll make sure that we have our model and schemas, and then we will look into how do we join them. Sorry, I shouldn't use the word join. How do we connect them? So, no, this one. Okay, so the first thing, I have two collections, so I'll have to create a model. So I should have a two models: books model and a library model. Okay, so let's take a look at book model first. It's standalone, it's kind of individual, it doesn't have to have any kind of relationship with the library, right? It can be on its own, right? So same thing from previous exercise, we create a schema, and this schema has two properties or two fields: author and title. All right, from the schema we create a model, and then we export that model. Okay, any questions on the book model? Straightforward, look at just as your user schema. It's even more simpler, just two fields, right? Author and title. There's no relationship, no indication it has any kind of relationship with the library model. Okay, so now we go back to our look at our library model. Let me open this as well. Okay, now for our library model, we are going to have some properties, and then we are going to have an array of books, right? Because our library contains books. So let's go to our library model over here. Schema definition, requirements, importing. All right, then we create our schema. So this library has a name property, and then it has an array of books. Okay, for now this is clear. We'll come back, I'll go what this is doing, but let me minimize this. Is this clear? So we have a library schema. It has only two properties. One is the name, which is the name of the library, and then it has an array of books. Okay, so how do we refer this, and how do we tell Mongoose that the array over here refers to a different collection that should exist in my Mongo database? Okay, so the first thing would be, what is the type of each object? You see this is an array, and within an array this is an object. So basically you are saying that the word books, the variable books, is going to be an array of objects. And how does the object look like? It has a type which is object ID. Okay, again, you don't have to remember this, or you don't have to learn this. You just need to know how to call an ID. You can always refer back to this activity, but what you need to understand is you need to have a type, and it has to have a type of an ID. Okay, this, if you go back to the schema types documentation, remember there were string, number, boolean. There was one ID called object ID. That's what we're using over here. Okay, and then what does this object refer to? Like, what kind of object this is going to be? It's going to be an object of book. Okay, and what does the book object looks like? It has an author, it has a title. So basically it's going to be an array of author and titles. All right, so now my library schema has a property called name, simple string. The second property is books, which is an array, and it is an array of objects. And what does the object has? It has an ID. Where is this ID coming from, or what kind of object is it referring to? It is referring to our book model. Okay, and that's the only mention of the model is going to be over here. Okay, this is how Mongoose will determine that, okay, there looks like there's some kind of a relationship and I need to refer it. But these are the two requirements: type, okay, and then ref. The keyword is ref, and ref tells you exactly which model is it referring to. Okay, make sure the name over here should match the name over here. Okay, exactly, case sensitive. So that's why. So this book over here that we are exporting, this thing over here should match this thing over here. Okay, now let's go back to our server.js and see how our routes are working. Let's close these. Oh, can minimize that. All right, so the first route is for creating a library. Okay, in this case, we are assuming we only have like one library, and all the books are going to belong to that single library. Okay, In actual, yes, you can have a second library and you can have different books assigned to it, but the UI over here does not allow for that. So we are going to assume there's only one library and all the books are going to be added to that collection. Okay, this is a simple create function. Create, you pass in the name, and then it will go ahead and create that collection with this entry. Okay, um, let's take a look at this one. This is going to create books. Okay, so what does it do? You go ahead, you get the information about a book in the request body. You create a book. Once this is successfully added to the books collection, it goes ahead and adds it to the library. Okay, remember my library collection has array of books and each book ID should be inserted in that collection. So this is how you insert it. db.library, this is the collection name. Okay, find one and update. Okay, it's going to go ahead and find um, the library, which is for our case is just one, right? We only have one entry in our library collection, so it doesn't matter. What is it going to do? It's going to go look for this array books. Okay, if you go back to your library collection, we do have an array called books. Okay, and then we are using the function push. What is it going to do? Is going to keep this ID and add it to the array. Okay, the push $push is the same functionality as you use array.push. All right, it goes ahead and appends and adds a new entry to the end of the array. That's what exactly what it does. So it goes, takes this ID and then inserts it to the array called books. Okay. Now, when I do slash books, all I'm doing, I'm running a find method and it returns me all the books from my collection, right? No change over here. Same thing. db.book.find returns me a collection of the books. Okay. So this is still the same thing. When I do library, it goes into the library collection, runs the find command, and gives me everything that is inside this collection. Again, no change. Same as we've been looking before. Okay. Now, if you want to, let's see if we, this is activity number 18. You guys should have the exact same code. I'm going to see if I can install this. I'm not going to make changes to the database name. We'll go with this one. Oh, okay, I already have it. So let's see, cd, this is activity number 18. Okay, we'll do npm I install, and that should be it. Okay, so node server. Okay, so it went ahead, created the collection. So let's go to our 3000. Okay, so my see your books should be empty. I haven't inserted anything. See your library. Okay, this should be one library over here because when the code starts, it automatically creates a single document in the collection. Books is empty, and then all of these are empty. So let's go ahead and create a book. Okay, submit. All right. So what happens now? Let's go back and look at each individual one. So right now it calls the slash book. So I should be able to see the book added to my collection. Same thing. Okay, book information, author and title. This is auto generated. Going back to my library, same thing. Library and my collection, remember it's going to only have an ID and that's what it does. And this code is successful because of this line over here, find and update. It adds just the book ID to my array of books. That's all I need over here. Okay. Now, the ID doesn't really help when you try to retrieve it. What I want is this object should be replaced on the fly with all the information about the books. Okay. So what is this book over here, right? I need the book name and the title. So that's where the relationship comes in. So this would be this last thing over here. All right. Same function, find, no change over here. It gets the library. The only change is this thing, dot populate. Remember dot include in sequelize, just change include to populate. Okay, use a populate function and mention what you are trying to populate. This should match whatever the name of the array that is inside your library function, library schema. So it's called books. So you're going to say populate books. So this time if you go to this one, populated with books, is going to call this route over here slash populated, is going to go and find um, all the documents from the library, and the library contains books array. Instead of just getting the IDs, since you have dot populate books, is going to go ahead, look into your books model as well, and fill out, give you back your author and title. Okay, so if you go back to populated with books, you should see it's just not the ID, it gives you back all the properties that are in your books object as well. Okay, again, this is different than see your books. Oh, see your library. Okay, this one is calling the library find function without populate. Okay, if you go back to the code over here, it calls this route without the populate function over here. So it doesn't actually give you any information about the book. Okay, just the ID. If you want all the information, you will have to add dot populate and then the name of the array, and then it's going to go back. If you go to this populated with books, it's going to give you back all the information about the book as well. Okay, again, this is the same functionality that you have when you have multiple tables in sequelize and you use the keyword include. Okay, again, if I would highly recommend go back, make sure you understand sequelize as well. If you didn't use more than one table in your project, might not be clear, but this is how. Remember, go back to the activities and sequelize, look at the keyword include. It's the same thing. The only difference is it's called populate over here and it's called include in sequelize. Okay, again, populate comes in effect when you have more than one collection and you're trying to make sure that there's some kind of relationship between the two collections. The same thing is in sequelize or MySQL. When you have more than one tables, you make a join. When you do a join, you use the keyword include and it gives you all the information from the other table as well. In Mongoose, you would use a keyword called populate. Okay, any questions? Again, books schema, same as before, there's nothing in the book schema. Library schema has a property called name and then an array of books, which is being referred to the schema that you have mentioned over here. Now, when you're getting the information back, you would use the same function that we have been seeing. The only thing you're adding over here is the dot populate function. What are you passing? This name is coming from what you have defined over here. Okay, if you change this, then this also changes. So make sure this thing is referring to this over here, and then this thing is referring to the schema name that you're giving in your book.js over here. Okay, so this ref, this is coming from your book schema. This is your internal within your library schema that you have defined already. Yes.
Just pointing out too on the post route when you're putting in a new book, they're changing the function.
Very nice.
So just keep that in mind if they're doing a return on the first one and they're going to change it to another.
All right. If this is how this is working, remember create is a async function, so you need the then one. And then once this is completed, that's when we want to call this function over here. So this is, if the syntax looks a little bit different, it's same as doing this and then adding a then function in the end. Okay, instead of doing a return this, you could do this thing, and then within the then function you would have a callback function and all that stuff. But the other way to do is the in this way. This is called callback chaining. So once this function is completed, okay, it's going to call this function. This is also async function. Once this is completed, then it's going to call this then function over here. Okay, the syntax is different, but it is the same thing. It's called chaining the callback functions. But as I said, this is same as this thing. You would have a then function, and then you would mention it over here. But then the only thing is, it kind of becomes it's kind of hard to see or hard to read. But the functionality wise is the same as this one. So instead of this, you would have this whole function inside over here, and then you won't need this part. Okay, so but if you want to go this route, this is other syntax, and this is how you would do it. You do a return and then catch the promise of this and this one over here. Okay, if this doesn't make sense, just keep up with the one that you guys have been using. So you would just do a this thing dot then and use it over there. All right, any last questions for the populate one? Okay, so let me so the next activity is again following the same user schema. You have to add the keyword populate, but I will this is activity number 19. I'll go over the unsolved and show you guys the solved one as well. So in this case, let's take a look how many models are there. So you guys have been working on user model. The new model that was added was a notes model. So it looks like a user can add a note to the screen. Okay, so the note schema has a title and a body. Okay, and a note looks like can be individual, but a user can have many notes. Okay, so no relationship change over here, but if you go back to your user, it should have an array of notes just as our library and the books model. So notes has an array. Again, this is the unsolved one. So this is already, the schema is already done for you, but make sure you go back, understand how, because eventually you guys will be creating this schemas on your own when it comes to project time. Okay, so this is already done. Now the only change I think would be in your server.js, and you would have to add a populate function. So this is good. You don't have to make any changes to create because it creates it. Get gives you all the notes back, no change over here. User gives you all the user information. Let's see, submit is also done for you. This is the one you have to complete. Okay, so same thing, this is the find method. The only change you would be doing is, if you go back to your find method over here for the user, okay, same thing, you are just adding a dot populate and then the name of the array that is in your user thing. So this is called notes, so we would just add notes over here. Okay, of course you won't do it over here. You would have to copy this whole thing and do this in the separate route that they're mentioning. Okay, so you have two examples, the library and the books one, and the user and the notes one. Okay, make sure to go back and look at this model over here and see how the relationship is. Again, this node is referring to this one over here. Okay, and in your server.js, when I'm using the populate, this is referring to the name of the array that you declared over here. Okay, so for this 19 activity, you have to create a new route and add nodes over there, and this should start working for you. I think I have a extra parentheses. I'll just move everything. This one, did I copy extra? Let's see. Okay, that's good. And then we add dot populate, and then notes, and that should be this. Okay. Now, Sam will go ahead and introduce you to the homework. Before he does it, I want you guys to know that there is a challenge activity as part of this as well. And this is number 20, which I think is very close to your homework. Scraping with Mongoose. We did scraping with MongoDB. I hope you guys went back and did that. This is the same thing. The only difference is you are, instead of using just MongoDB, you're using a ORM Mongoose to complete this activity. Okay. Right now you have only the unsolved one. I will go ahead and post the solution. Make sure before you start the homework you understand this activity, because I think this one really is close to the homework one. Is that right, Ethan or Sam? Do you guys know? Right? Yeah. Because in the homework you're going to scrape, and he'll go through it. You just have to scrape a website and then store that in your Mongo database. There might be a few more things. I'm not sure. He'll go through it in the next few minutes. Okay. Any questions, concept questions about MongoDB or Mongoose? Even if the syntax is not clear, I want to make sure that you guys understand the concept. The thing is, if you know the concepts, you can go back and look at the activity and figure out what it is, right? But if you don't understand what Mongoose is, what is the relationship, and which function is coming from where, it's not going to help you in the activity as well. So, any questions before we move on from Mongo and Mongoose for like forever? Because today is the last class for this one. I'll go over what we will start on Thursday and Saturday. No questions? No? Good question. It's so you have a choice. You can either use MongoDB or MySQL. Yeah. You can pick one and you can use it. Yes.
Will we be using just like the MongoDB for the homework, or is Mongoose or this is like
It uses Mongoose, but Sam and Ethan will confirm in a minute. They'll go over the homework, but I think it uses Mongoose. Okay, it does use Mongoose. Okay, so for our project, when we get to that part, I'll clarify, but it's a choice. You can either use MySQL, SQLize, or Mongo, or Mongoose. Again, this is just my personal preference. If I was doing it, I would use Mongo just because I want to make sure that I understand MongoDB. I know you guys are MySQL, you're not comfortable, but it is better to use Mongo just to make sure that you understand, make yourself understand. If I'm going to do authentication again, I'm going to do it using MongoDB. Just everybody is clear. I'm not going to do it in MySQL because it's already done. I know what it is. I want to make sure I understand Mongo as well. What is it? And then forget about it? Why would you forget about it? Well, if you don't use it, yeah, we'll forget about it. Yeah, you'll have to keep using it. Okay, so Sam will go ahead and introduce the homework, but before that, so this concludes the database part of your MERN stack. The last remaining is the React one. Thursday and Saturday. Thursday will kick off React. Again, it's not going to be exactly React on Thursday. That will be Saturday. But what am I going to talk about on Thursday is important. The thing is, those are the concepts that React uses, but they are JavaScript. They are advanced JavaScript. So I want to make sure they're like 5 or 6 concepts. I want to go through those concepts individually. Again, they are not part of React. The only thing is React uses them a lot. Okay. But those are part of JavaScript. So we're going to come back to JavaScript on Thursday, make sure those concepts are clear. Then on Saturday, we'll kick off React officially for 1 day, and then you'll have like 2 weeks vacation. Again, I know it's nighttime, everybody is tired, please. This is probably the last topic that we have to cover. Make sure you understand. It's a very important topic because that's basically your skill set that you're going to advertise and say, hey, I'm a React developer. So make sure you are not medium, you're expert on React. You know the concept, you actually understand how to use React. Okay, so we'll cover that on Thursday. Meanwhile, what do you mean?
There you go. That's good. Thank you. All right. Of course, you guys know how to read, but a couple things to point out here is you guys are going to need to deploy this MongoDB, and in order to do that on Heroku, you're going to have to incorporate MLab. So there's instructions here on how to do that. A couple of other things here. You have to use all these dependencies in order to get credit. And to see what it looks like. Basically, you'll be scraping like you did last Saturday.
Yes.
And here's an example of it. So you got, yeah. Alright, so you scrape, hit that button, and all these will load. And so you can save them as well. And then want to view those saved ones. Go to the saved ones. Any questions? Yeah.
It's saying that the user can use the comments do I have to register the user or can you
Actually, the user will have to be, because you'll have to leave the user, yeah. You have to use the user.
so I have to
Yeah. Because, yeah. Because you don't want to overwrite your submissions. Otherwise, you won't be able to see each user will only go. Only the present user will be able to see it. So yeah.
So if you click the article notes, I think that's what she's. Click the purple, blue. So you don't.
Oh, you don't
Yeah.
have no authorization. No.
So it's the notes are related to article. Anyone can put it, yes. So relationship that we saw user and notes, that's what it is. This time it's articles and notes. One article can have multiple notes. Yeah, there's no user registration.
Yeah, there's no auth. That's correct. Yeah. So that it.
And remember, it's MLab Heroku for SQL. It was JAWS DB, and they give you a free subscription for MLab, which is basically MongoDB.
It's actually easier to hook up to actually too. But you don't
Okay,
have
to
to
be able to
actually.
use Robot 3D and connect to that and see the collection.
Yeah, that's it.
No? No, it's still MLab. I checked Heroku. Yeah, they still have MLab.
Yeah, you used to have to create an account on MLab. Heroku has a connection to do it. Straight
Yeah,
through.
they still do MLab.
Any questions? That's it.
And this one's due after we come back from the yeah. Great.
This is. I don't. Did you check? Let me check. January 4th. Take it from Josh. Hold on. Let me quickly confirm. January 4th is what? Tuesday? Saturday? Okay, so the next assignment is due on a Saturday, which is January 4th. Just make sure you check, confirm it from Bootcamp spot as well. Okay? Alright, I'll see you guys on Thursday. Yes, sorry. Ah,
You're updated portfolio. So for full credit on that one, they're looking for the employer ready and employer competitive stuff on links to all your projects, your GitHub link, your LinkedIn, and beyond that, just get it pretty much starting to look like you're doing things. Just one link, just a few just one link.
yes. It didn't work? Oh, no.
Basically, this is what I was